Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 133. Quick reminder, please follow IOH on LinkedIn to support the live stream. The episode notes can be found at the standard wiki page, which I'm just going to put up here real quick. And so our guest today is Andor Kesselman, founder of Agent Overlay. Welcome, Andor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And before we go into the topic today, maybe, Andor, could you just tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Sure. So I worked initially on computer vision systems at the beginning half of my career. I worked basically doing the opposite of what I ended up working on my second and third portions of my career, which was on tracking people in stores, understanding how people moved through cameras. So that applied a lot of computer vision, machine learning. And then I took a sabbatical, traveled around the world, and said, I want to do something a little bit different. So I ended up going in the opposite spectrum of privacy-preserving technology. And I ended up focusing on visas. So my wife is Indian. We were trying to get to the US, and it took us 3 years to apply for our visa and get it done. So it's like, how does this, why did it take so long? How do we make this faster? So I ended up moving into focusing on personal data stores. And since then, I've been focused on the decentralized identity space. I co-chair the technical steering committee at DIF. We're spinning up a whole bunch of work around AI agents. And then just these last few months, I started this new startup called Agent Overlay, and it's focused on exclusively multi-agent theory, which was a problem when I was studying computer vision I was very focused on. So we'll get into it later, but multi-agent theory is a very fascinating subject, and it was a subject that I thought we had about 40 years or so until it was going to be a big problem. And it turned out it came a lot faster than I was expecting. So this is where it's been really interesting.
Cool. And so let me introduce the topic today. So the topic is governing the agentic web. And I think we're going to go really existential here and say, before we could even say what governing the agentic web is, we need to say what is an agent itself. Like I think we need to start there. So how do you define an AI agent actually?
Yeah, so I've seen it's a great question. I've seen a number of proposals around how you define an AI agent, but I tend to think about it actually quite simple. AI agents are essentially software that perceive the environment, plan, and then execute on that environment, and then they take that feedback cycle and just loop and loop and loop around with non-determinism. And I think one of the best diagrams is if you look at Anthropic's website, they have a diagram of how this looks. Essentially, they have like a feedback loop of an agent, an action, and then an environment that kind of flows in and out. And then they have also, which is important, the human component connecting to the agent. And so when we look at agents, they're they don't even need to be smart, but I think they do need to have some sort of delegatory pattern with either an organization or a human, and then they're autonomous and they can do things and act on things. They're different from traditional software because they're non-determinism and their open-endedness. An agent might do things you completely unexpect. Sure, you could write a random loop in a program and theoretically consider that, I guess, an agent. I thought about like what's the minimal version of an agent you could possibly make, but typically agents have a lot more intelligence than just a random loop that does random things. They'll typically connect with tools. They typically use LLMs, which are large language models for processing information. So I think there is probably a limit that's a soft limit on an agent must be at least somewhat intelligent to be called an AI agent. And otherwise it's just an agent. And so that's been sort of how I think the space has generally looked at it, the problem, but you can find different patterns, but the best ones tend to be the most simple versions, relying on basically a reactive pattern with environment. If that's like the simplest way to describe it, I think.
Okay. I have just a dumb question. What's your favorite AI agent today of the day in the year 2025?
It's a good question. So I think most the AI agents I use today are not true AI agents. And so that's actually probably the surprising thing. I'm working on building better AI agents internally for myself. But the reason is I use Cursor, obviously. I use Claude. I use all these existing tools, but they're generally acting with pretty hardened human interaction pathways, right? When you talk to a Cursor, when you talk to a Claude, you tend to actually type into it and you're interacting with it directly. And I tend to think about agents a lot more autonomous in nature, and so they're doing things much more without my control and behind the scenes. And so from that perspective, probably your some of the work that's happening on your phones right now is probably it's more behind the scenes, but it's happening all behind under your radar and it's processing stuff. I think those are probably more useful agents, and the way I see the world eventually moving, which is not by no means the consensus, is that most of this stuff is going to be happening without your visibility. It's going to be happening under the radar, almost as a projection of the current web, where a lot of these operations are going to be happening below surface, and so they won't need human interaction patterns. So one of the areas that I've been focused on is how do I build safe interaction patterns, which is why I don't have many agents currently running that I would like, is because currently if you just ran them in your software somewhere and just said, go do these things, it's not going to be very good. It's going to be unsafe. And there's going to be tons of things it might do that I'm not particularly happy with. And so we need to figure out better control mechanisms to be able to actually launch these things in production in a safe way. And so this is the long answer to your very short question about what's my favorite agent, and it doesn't exist yet.
Okay, so what's the scariest AI agent that is running around out there without guardrails?
There's a lot of work happening right now on so there's a couple ones. I think if you look at most of the purchasing agents, there's a lot of agents that are trying to do purchasing behavior, and this is a very slippery slope where there's a lot of challenges. So Perplexity is launching something. OpenAI has their agent mode, which if you've ever used is a mode that actually takes over your browser and does some agentic flows where it can actually, basically model out like a human. It can go and click things, and it can go all the way up to the payment gateways. It won't input your data. But these are patterns that are, potentially they can get pretty dangerous pretty quickly. And so hopefully, and what we've seen so far is that luckily, there's a recognition that some of these very sensitive, especially like financial patterns, shouldn't be unmonitored and without human intervention. But the trajectory is that they will eventually be. You're going to tell your AI, go buy these groceries, and find out, figure out what I want to eat for dinner tonight. Go buy the groceries and do this under the hood. And so what's going to happen is if that might happen thousands and thousands of times, and then you might realize, oops, it's been doing it wrong for the last 2 years. And turns out I have this massive bill that I didn't mean to pay for because every single time it was purchasing some goods that I didn't expect. Or I was, so that's where it gets tricky and scary, because there's just so much that could happen if you're not paying attention, which we're not quite there yet, but it's getting there.
Somebody's going to say, have it like minimize my Amazon bill.
Exactly.
Across find out all the places I can save money. It sounds great until you maybe get a 10 times Amazon bill. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. So
I think the other thing, and this is just to interject a little bit, I think the other interesting thing, and this is, we're in a newer space in terms of how fast this is moving. Like AI agents are not a new concept. We've had them in theory, actually since 400 BC. There's been this concept of automatons. This is not a new concept. 80 years ago, there was McCarthy coining AI, and we've had work happening for a while in this area. It just, the speed at which it's moving is a moment to reflect and see, as humanity, are we moving in the right direction? Because if you look at just on a trajectory level, how fast things are moving and how little time we actually have to prepare for this world where eventually everything is going to be under our visibility, under our radar. We have very little time to react to this. And so this is where I think if you look at even past the technology on a society level and all the repercussions as individuals, this is something where we're not quite ready to handle. And it's moving very fast, and it might work exactly as it was intended, which might have adverse consequences, actually, which is, I think, an interesting scenario that is possible. So this is kind of, again, where a lot of my energy is spent on is where are the directions that need to be nudged in the space to make sure that we're thinking about these things correctly. And let me put, like, last thing here is that there's a ton of money being thrown into making AI agents work. So in case you didn't notice, that is a major problem. And so they will make it work.
It's great. Although I did joke about it, you can't throw a rock and not hit 10 like MCP security proxies today. There's one sprouting up everywhere. So sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, let's spin this into governance then. So I think, we had a sort of it's funny because we're 10 minutes in and we only talked about the first portion of the first word. Yep. So let's go to the next word and talk about governance.
Yep.
So we have this new class of AI agents. There's a new type of entity. I think it's really fair. Like we had, we have a person entity, we have a software entity, and there's something new about this AI agent that means that we need to capture new metadata about its how it defines its capabilities and its other stuff. So I'm on board with there's this new entity called an AI agent that's somewhat autonomous, not just automation, but actually might be. I liked your example of something running on my phone, and deciding like what to do and reacting to the environment. And so let's go to the next word, which is governance. Now that we have this new kind of like AI entity, how do we, what does governance mean? And are there any human analogies we could make to governance structures? Can we include them in our existing governance structures? Or what does governing mean? And do we have any patterns for this that we can use from today?
Yeah, I think most of these patterns exist with a few nuances. It's a really good question. I ask myself this question a lot. What does it mean to govern an AI agent? I think mostly what we're talking about is existing systems and existing patterns that the volume has increased tremendously in terms of the attack surface. And there's nuances around how these patterns get invoked. I think the best example is payments, which I'll quickly go into and then come back to the whole governance as an overview sort of thing. When agents make payments, we actually use a bill from the 1999s called Uniform Electronics Transaction Act as sort of the mechanism to guardrail against liability for these payments. And so basically, if you look at how the law works, generally in any transaction, there's a three-party. It's a three-party system. You have a third party, which is a seller, the consumer, which is the principal, and then you have, in this case of an agent provider that's actually doing the transaction. That's the person running the agent that you connect to that says, hey, I'm going to go do this transaction. Now, if something goes wrong, there needs to be in current law, when you go to Stripe or when you go to any of these websites and you try to make a transaction, when something goes wrong, they have to give you a way to remediate the transaction. That still has to happen whether you have an agent or not. The difference is that now, instead of just it being a fat finger for a transaction, the agent's proactively going to go out, find a grocery store, search for grocery items, and then purchase them, and that you're not necessarily going to be in that loop directly. So this is kind of the new thing, is that humans might have very advanced flows without being a part of it. And so when we look at governance, we're talking about mostly a lot of existing systems just being reapplied to more advanced patterns where proactive, I think getting a human in the loop, as an example, at certain places is going to be a very important pattern we need to knock down correctly. Being able to do this at scale. So the other thing is when we look at governance of current systems, generally it's maintainable. Like we have some volume that is we can wrap our heads around, and it's more static. It's not moving as quickly. But it gets more challenging to govern something when it's moving so fast and it's moving so flexibly and fluid that it's very difficult to anchor on, here's exactly what's happening now, and here's how to look at the system. And so I think we're going to need new techniques to be able to understand that data, to be able to understand, for example, what authorizations have been given, what permissions have been allocated, what are the current risk parameters that I'm operating under, how do we guardrail against agents that are delegating against themselves. So those are the questions that I think become more difficult with agents that we're a little bit more constrained with non-agents or just general services and human interactions. But fundamentally, I think they're the same. In the end of the day, they're just more advanced interactions of the same things. We still need trust frameworks. We still need all that stuff. But that hasn't changed.
Right. I want to go back to the human in the loop comment.
Yep.
This is in a way not new. I know I see it as a 3-letter acronym, and it's sort of it's useful jargon right now. But in the old days, we just call that consent.
Yeah.
And really, what we want to do is be able to represent that this delegation happened, properly from the human. And that might involve having the human right there and generating a brand new artifact that's very fresh, that shows you that the human was in the loop like really recently.
Yeah.
How do you convey? So the normal way that we would do this in OAuth is we would create a JWT that represents a record of that event, the authentication event or the consent event. And then that JWT would be input to policy.
Yep.
Now, if so, what we're really talking about here is, and this is why I think OAuth comes into it. How else are you going to get a record of that consent without OAuth?
Yeah. So I think when the agent asks a human for approval, an OAuth flow is likely a better fit. It's when the agents are so. I see. Let's talk about this human pattern real quick, and how those human patterns fit, and how OAuth fits into this. Where OAuth doesn't fit as well, I think, and just general challenges. So generally with agents and humans, I have today, and I'm waiting for somebody to say that there's more, classified generally 3 sort of intervention flows. The first flow is a human in the loop flow, which is what we're talking about. The second one is a delegatory flow, which is that a human has delegated. So a human in the loop is not even a delegation. It could be just an approval, right? So that is required. Then delegatory flow is saying that an agent is acting on behalf of a human. So that is actually a transition or a transition of somewhat capabilities and permissions down to an agent. And then you have a null flow, which I consider, which is the approval that there is no agent in the flow. Or it is only agents, right? This is kind of the absence or non-absence of agents as a proof. And when we look at this, I think in terms of humans and agents interacting, OAuth as a starting point to say, here, I have a permission to you, great. But when we start getting downstream into how agents are permissioning against themselves, OAuth flows, like continually chaining back up to the agents, struggle. To the human, sorry. So if you look at an example was when we were doing this payment work around transactions and how transactions would flow, it's pretty easy to just say, hey, human, can you authorize this agent to transact on this good, right? But what was more difficult was when we started to get like agent-to-agent communication where agent A was purchasing from agent B this good, and they needed to do a loop back flow to say back to the human, oh, we see this agent was trying to purchasing on your behalf. We want the human to approve it on your side before we can continue on as a seller
So
of the good.
It just sounds like you need better tokens to me, honestly. I was sort of chuckling because I remember my wife, she's produced a podcast called Dolores and Howard Kick the Bucket.
Okay.
It's about this older couple who decides they want to take matters into their own hands and just end it together.
Yeah.
So we've been learning a lot about advanced directives. So when you're a person, even you today, even your kids, as soon as they turn 18, you ideally want to have advanced directives to say, okay, this person's in charge of medical, this person's in charge of financial, this person's in charge of shutting down my social media, And so it sounds like what we need maybe is advanced directives for agents, so that the agents can say, well, in this case, the person's dead. So
Yeah.
we really need something that's going to be able to know that we're speaking for this person.
Hmm.
But the idea is that I don't have to be present. I could even be dead, and this is
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
good. So it comes back to, it sounds to me like you just don't have cool tokens.
Yeah, I think token fidelity is one of the things. I think though the auth flows, like I've seen a number of work. I tend to lean toward fundamentally OAuth will struggle. To be honest, this is my personal belief, but I think this is a testing ground. So we're running at Diff an a lab, not a lab, sorry, a working group that's focused on agent authority use cases, and we're specifically going to start to see where these things break down. Is OAuth sufficient to cover the delegatory cases that you're talking about if you just advance the tokens? And there is some good IETF work happening right now in OAuth that is trying to address this problem.
Right.
There's other models, like there's object capabilities and zcaps, which are kind of our main focus right now. Is can we use this as a way to delegate that's more efficient, faster, and can be work at higher granularities than the current OAuth models. But I think until we put it to the test and until we've really, run through all the use cases, understand the breakdowns, it's this is where the rubber will meet the road, and we'll find out, what is the right patterns that we need to do to establish agentic identity on a delegatory basis. And it might be right, maybe it is just tokens. But it also might not be, and I think we need to keep our minds open that we need the best pattern, not and that might mean some changes as well.
Well, ultimately, the best pattern's people are just gonna use it. So
Yeah, exactly.
ultimately, the best pattern gets adopted. Hence why we're not using protocols before TCP/IP, no matter how great Microsoft might have said NetBEUI is. Um, and so, yeah, I wanted to actually go into. Um, I'm sorry, you were talking about how OAuth is maybe not the answer, let's say. And I agree. We need all the above, right? Actually, there's another IETF group called Whimsy, right?
Yep.
That's not even under the OAuth group. That's a totally different group. Um, and then there's other important attestations, like passkey attestations from the FIDO Alliance. What kind
Hmm.
of authenticator are you using? Is that a hardware-bound private key? Is it a shared private key? And do I trust that hardware vendor
Yep.
where they make the key?
Yep.
Um, and platform attestations from Google, like this is an app that's running on a non-rooted phone,
Hmm.
and we know because we have an attestation about the app. Um, Storage of private keys. So there's a lot of like sort of tokens that we want to factor into our policies. But I'm curious though, because I know that you're in a slightly different community than I'm in. If you don't like, what types of credentials do you think we're likely to see other than JWTs? Because I think we know, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of JWTs that are interesting, but what are the credential sort of formats and types of credentials that you think we might see that might provide an alternative to, let's say, OAuth JWTs?
Hmm.
And I'm putting you on the spot on this question, so if you don't have an answer, that's fine. We can move on.
No,
I have
I'm
15 more
thinking. I've
questions.
seen a number of proposals. I think the thing is, I like zcaps are, and it is, I think one of the more promising directions. But I think this is an area we're searching right now. Is this how you actually delegate out? Like, what's that credential look like? So zcaps are JSON LDs. I don't know if that's, again. I would need to spend some time.
How are JSON LDs signed? Is there
Uh,
JSON LD signing? I remember that spec, but is that actually final and accepted?
no, they can be signed through. You generally wrap them, right? So it would be like, for example, a VC would wrap it, so that you can issue them as a VC, which would have signed tokens in it.
Okay, and the VC is a JWT though, isn't it?
It can be wrapped as a
Ultimately.
JWT. It
Okay.
depends, right?
So what else would you wrap it at other than a JWT? I don't know. That's my question.
No, there was a few other methods. There was when I was looking at this work, this was like a while ago, so I was doing some evaluation on different types of signing mechanisms. There is, I have to pull it back up. Put me on the spot on remembering this.
Yeah, that's fine. Wait. Okay, so let's move into.
You can sign it through other mechanisms. It doesn't have to be a JWT,
Yeah.
but most likely it would be a JWT. That's the general preference.
I think it sort of answered my question, because it's like, yeah, JWT, it seems like it's just like the major format. If you're going to get something and it's signed, it's probably a JWT at this point.
Probably.
Yeah, and then what goes in there, who knows? It could be JSON LD, it could be some other format, or who knows what. Yeah. So okay, so agent. I'm going to ask another kind of basic question. What's the right identifier for an agent? Should the agent identifier be a URI that we know it's not going to collide? And if so, who issues those URIs, and what do those URIs look like? Or is it a DID?
Yeah. I think there's probably two levels of identifiers, most likely. There's your internal identifiers and your external. So I think in terms of identifiers externally, my probably recommendation would be DIDs, but we'll see where that lands. There's a project called NANDA, which is an MIT project focused on the agentic web. And they have a registry that they're proposing, which is a federated registry that focuses on, there is a naming service basically that allows you to register agents by name. So that would be, there would need to be some consensus around like, how do you make sure that the names don't collide and so forth. But they're proposing as a string, it doesn't have to be a DID. But I would probably lean toward most agents externally being DIDs. Internally, though, that's a different story. So if DIDs don't fit your internal mechanisms, then you might need to use like a Spiffy ID, or Whimsy has their own ID, right? Whimsy IDs. So there's various. Go ahead, sorry.
What's the DID method that you're using for your DIDs?
There are a few. So there's a couple things. DIDs, obviously, you can choose whatever method you want. But there's a few efforts right now that are really important in the DID space. One is the Decentralized Identity Foundation is working on a DID recommendations working group. And that focus in that working group is to define a few recommended DID methods that are more sort of evaluated and sort of not certified the wrong word, but they're at least looked at by the community. And so the ones right now that are getting the most amount of traction is, I don't know if you know DID Web VH. This is the one that Canada uses. It has transferable. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. It's right. I was going to say, is it DID Web, but you said it's not DID Web. It's DID Web DH.
Yes, VH.
Oh, VH. Okay.
So
well, we have episode notes, which I'm now going to tell people about more. So we can add some more links too. After the episode.
So DID Web VH is used mostly. I think Canada's using it today, but it's a method for a verifiable history. So unlike DID Web, you can as you move it around, if you lose your domain name, you can actually show your history of your DID method.
That's interesting.
There's also high use of, in the case of if you're using for example, Blue Sky right now, DID PLC is one of the most used DID methods in the market. It has tons of usage. And then Peer, obviously, for generally like anything with privacy preserving, you don't want to necessarily commit. So there's Peer that you can use. And I particularly liked, there's another method called DID DHT, which was used as a method that actually anchored to the BitTorrent mainnet, which I thought was a very interesting approach. And so it essentially was trying to provide a DID method that had fast resolution times, no blockchain, and was decentralized. So that was another approach I think has some viability as well. But because it's decentralized, there's no one way, and you have to choose the way that works best for you. And there's probably going to be just alignment around certain methods more than others.
So you don't have to. It's hard not to notice that we have a cedar theme in the IOH live stream.
Yeah.
And So I selfishly want to divert this towards policy.
Sure.
In your description, you actually talk about runtime policy enforcement.
Yep.
And I have, sort of a question. Obviously I'm really new to this AI agent stuff too, and I wonder, in those cases, where does the PDP run? Does it run? Do you think it should run embedded in the agent, or do you think that some type of cloud PDP would be efficient, or would it work? Would a cloud PDP even work?
It's a good question. I'm exploring this as well. So right now, my gut is closer to the agent is going to be better, but
Hmm.
this is an area where there's active exploration, and even for myself. I think what's interesting to me is, will the current, like if you use Cedar policy engines, or if you use OPA or OpenFGPA, the question I'm wondering right now is, first of all, will we be able to support delegatory policies? How flexible are the policies, and can they dynamically adjust with the agents? And how will agents, if they needed to work with those policies, ingest them in, as far as like their way that they're contextualizing their permissions downstream if for other agents? So this is where it's kind of an interesting area where there is, I don't even have the answers today entirely, because this is like exploration of like where's the current state, and does the state of the current policy engines actually support the complex flows that we're expecting to see for agents. Generally, I'll just say that like my gut is that what's going to happen is agents will need much more dynamic. So generally, when you write, for example, OPA or Cedar policies, they tend to be static. We'll need something a lot more dynamic. And so we'll need something that can react to updates quicker than what you generally would do if you were to write policies through an engine or some sort. And so this is the question that, what does that look like? I don't know. I'm sure maybe you've been living the Cedar world for quite a while. Maybe you have some thoughts around what that should look like. I'd love to, but that's where I think things will move.
Yeah. My knee-jerk reaction is always try and move the PDP to the edge, so that if the like, let's say it's a phone app, like you said before, then that phone app is not connected to the network. It could still make decisions autonomously based on the policies it knows about at that time.
Yep.
So I think, but my general take on it is that these don't have to be mutually exclusive, because there are some times when Graph is really good at modeling certain authorization problems. Graphs, you can't do ABAC because they're entities, but they don't have properties. So, but there are certain solutions graphs are great for. There's certain, as you mentioned, if you had an agent that wanted more flexibility, then Rego would be okay. So if determinism wasn't your goal, and making universal statements about security so you could comply with like regulations, if that's your goal, then you should use Cedar. But if your goal is, I wanted to buy airline tickets for me when the price, to San Francisco drops below, $200, in that case, I think I might need Rego for that. Or maybe my agent can build a smarter agent by using a more flexible policy. So
what do you mind me asking a question and sort of
sure.
back is, what if you needed a hybrid approach? Is that something that you've explored ever, which is somehow doing a higher level like static policies, like these are the regulatory requirements that you need, and then lower below that, having something that's more dynamic that allows these agents to adapt quicker to real time requirements?
So that's just, I guess, if you could write an application that can use more than one PDP, you could, that could be fine. Like they'll do that. When we talk about governing, though, getting back to the title, I think to me, governing means that I can say universally what are the guardrails for this thing. And so somehow, if the PDP is not analyzable, and I can't programmatically understand that I know what the guardrails really are, like where do I stand actually? it's a black box, and I just hope it works. So to me, we're in an age where we can generate code, and
Mhm.
thankfully we can generate policies.
Yep.
So I had ChatGPT generate Cedar policies that for a ticket system like GitHub, and it generated me like a stack of policies, right?
Yep.
There's so many policies that we don't need an AI agent to go through them, because that's predictive and it makes mistakes all the time. We
Mhm.
need to be able to say, given the stack of policies that my AI agent generated, is this true?
Do you
Um,
do you think I know I'm flipping a little bit the questions, but I
yeah.
do have a question for you. So you've been working in obviously policy layer for a very long time. Do you think how does the policies visualization scale when we start to think about possibly millions of policies, right? How do we scale that correctly? Is the current ecosystems supportive of that dynamic?
When you're talking about millions of policies, you're looking at like fraud detection and anomaly detection, not visualizations. Um, I think visualizations are really good when you have complex relationship hierarchies. Um, I had a guest on the show who was talking about ODRL. Um, so this is the digital rights and the relationships between owners of assets. I mentioned the photo attribution. So
Yep.
if you display this photo, you must display the photographer, is Andor.
Yep.
Um, and likewise, Andor, you might say, I don't want this photo ever used in Russia for any
Sure.
reason. Or so there could be a restriction or an obligation. Um, and so in those types of like relationships of who owns that content, the graph model is fantastic. um, because it gets so complicated, you can do it, and having the visualization really helps. But if you have a lot of policies, I think that you don't really need to. We don't visualize so much of this stuff. I don't know why I need to visualize it. What I need is anomaly detection and threat detection, that sees like the best thing to me about moving the PDP to the edge is
Mhm.
that we're going to get an audit log um,
Sure.
of decisions, and we're going to be able to do anomaly detection on denied policies at a level of detail that we've never been able to get before. Because if
Mhm.
you're right now, we mostly do intrusion detection based on login events. And then after the user log in, all this stuff happens and we have no idea. And now we're going to get a view of what that data looks like. We're going to get every decision as a fire hose of data, actually. And that's going to enable us to do some new threat detection.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I think on the topic of observability, because I think observability is a part of this. The question is I think there's two paradigms, right? Which is this push paradigm. Hey, you're going to get these notifications basically that hey, you need to look at these things, right? But I do think even in maturity, there's going to be times when you're just going to want to look and see what the hell do I have. Like it's not about necessarily a problem,
mhm.
but you want to see like what does the landscape look like for me, right? Like what policies have been sent out, what is
Yeah.
the volume of them, how fast are they moving generally. You're going to want to do some data exploration on it. Maybe it's done a lot by the agent, but as a human I can imagine the desire
When
to
you
go
say
in.
governance, do you mean how does a person govern? Or
Yeah.
because I immediately go to enterprise governance. So you're thinking about personal governance, like how do I govern my agents personally?
No, I'm thinking about how I'm thinking about a human in an organization. So
Hmm.
you have an organization that's deployed
Okay.
a whole bunch of AI agents. You have your IT team, for example, your CISO, and he's like, okay, we have 500 agents, 1,000 agents, a million agents
Yeah.
deployed right now. So to govern them, like I would want to know, like holistically, what's currently operating, how much agents are actually doing critical tasks, what are the guardrails in place if something goes wrong? What's my risk, for example, right? Risk evaluation right now for agents is very difficult to do. If there's an issue, how like the replay on how the agent became where it became is much going to be
Mhm.
much harder than traditional systems. So it's not just going to be logging. I don't know if that's entirely enough. You'll need the full context that kind of got ingested in from the agent side. And I think they're, especially because LLMs are typically hard in what we call interpretability, which is the ability to actually understand what's going on with the actual models themselves. You'll probably need to track provenance of the actual, like how the agent, what models it was using, and even go potentially further than that. So you can imagine if some agent does something haywire, you're going to need to understand, okay, what model was it using? Then understand the process of which the model was created, and even go further to understand, like, and understand, only certain models are allowed in my infrastructure, as an example.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's a unique challenge we haven't really had to deal with as much with traditional services. Traditionally, you just write code, and you run through a whole process to get it, onto your systems. Whereas now you're going to actually want to understand, like, where the models were created. It's kind of like supply chain, but
Mhm.
the difference is it's model supply chain. It's not just code software supply chain.
Right. It's interesting that you talk about supply chain because, the SBOM, being in
Yep.
the federation space, we talk a lot about how does this token get issued, who signs it, how do you do revocation.
Hmm.
Um, and when I heard a great talk at the State of OpenCon in London, they do that in February in
Yep.
London every year. Um, they talked about all the signing that happens in the software supply chain from the package to consumption.
Hmm.
And it was funny because they said, and if anything happens here, all bets are off on the software.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of overlap actually with software supply chain and identity.
Yeah.
Um, so I do see that as an issue, but we're coming up on the end. We're going to go over maybe a couple of minutes, but I wanted to just say something about governance, which is that if you ask a SailPoint or a Savient about governance, they
Mhm.
will tell you that governance is about holding people accountable. Now, I don't know if you buy into that definition. The way you described it is sort of interesting because you said we want to know a person is going to have multiple agents, and we want to hold the person accountable maybe for running a certain agent, and then we'll want to know what's the provenance and software supply chain that created the software that agent came from.
Mhm.
Um, but to me, it seemed like the governance part was holding the person accountable. How do you think about that?
I think holding a person accountable is, I think that's one very good way to look at it. The reason I hesitate a little bit is because I think part of this is not just about accountability. It's about, um, I guess there's the other approach, which is thinking about just how do I actually effectively run these things at scale. And I would consider that at some level governance as well. Yes, fundamentally that boils down to liability. Um, you need to be able to pin somebody, but even if it yeah, I just generally look at it probably a little bit more broad than just liability, personally.
Mhm.
But I can understand and empathize with the concept of liability as being the final sort of anchor to governance, and that makes sense to me. Uh,
Yeah,
but
and let me just interject for a second and say maybe another way to look at it is forget about holding the people accountable. Let's just look at the risk and figure out how do we minimize the risk. Um, because the person-centric approach maybe has led, then you have a manager who's trying to figure out what's my liability
yeah,
and go into it. So I think when you look at scaling policy, that we really need to, if you want to scale it, we need to be able to know what's true when we have a huge amount of policies. And the only way to do that is to be able to have tools that allow us to analyze and make provable statements about it.
yeah,
So right back to my cedar um, pitch. And we need those agents at the edge for performance scalability reasons. So anyway, last thoughts. Um,
I think it's all as for just my last thoughts is it's moving really fast. The it's incredibly quick, and so just keeping up with the space has been incredibly difficult. So um, know that. if you're interested in the space, please not only get involved, but know that you're probably going to be lost as much as anybody else, and it's okay. Like, I think we're all trying to piece together. It's very complicated what everything's happening. And so my final thoughts are just, this needs to be solved, because there are a few bad scenarios, which if we don't solve these problems right, it goes very bad. And so part of this is actually a request for folks. If you're interested in this space, please make sure you're proactive. I see a few folks in the chat that have been working and talking on the threads about some of their concerns around AI agents, and it's completely valid. We do need to get this right, because otherwise we're going to go to a pretty dark place. So that's my last thought. Is this is an exciting and scary time at the same time, and moving at insane rates.
I'm just going to show the comment, because sometimes the comments don't get saved. So at least Tom will know that the comment was showed. I try and answer the comments after the episode. I try and answer all the comments. I try and listen to the guests during the episode, because I'm not, like, my mind isn't fast enough to, like, listen to you formulate a question and read chat. No. But let me quickly announce the next episode. We're having a pretty relevant conversation on OpenID Connect A for agents. So we'll find out what the OpenID Foundation is up to. That's a really big working group. I don't know, Andor, are you in that working group?
I am not, and that's another, too many working groups. It's hard to keep track of how many working groups there are. That's another issue.
We'll find out next week. And yeah, so I think thank you, Andor, so much. Thank you for distracting me from my boring day and enabling me to talk about something different. And thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mike.